You walk past a man in the airport wearing a faded grey t-shirt, scuffed sneakers, and a watch that looks like it came from a drugstore. You don't look twice. Then you find out he just sold his company for $200 million. Somewhere, a guy in a brand new luxury car with a lease payment he can barely afford is rolling past you both. And he's the one you assumed was rich. Your brain got it backwards. And once you understand why, you'll never look at a price tag the same way again. Here's the strange part. The things that actually make someone wealthy are almost never the things that make someone look wealthy. In fact, the louder the signal, the more likely it's covering for something underneath. This isn't a coincidence, it's a pattern. And once economists and psychologists started studying it, they found the same story playing out again and again, in different decades, different countries, different income brackets. Start with the watch. A Princeton study asked people to compare financial profiles. Same income, same lifestyle, but different combinations of assets and debt. The finding was strange. People with more debt and more stuff actually felt richer than people with fewer possessions, but no debt at all, even when the second group had a higher net worth. Your brain isn't built to calculate net worth. It's built to scan for visible signals and make a snap judgment. That snap judgment is almost always wrong, and it's wrong in a very specific direction. It overweights what's visible and ignores what's invisible. A car loan is visible, a retirement account is not. So the brain assumes the car means money, and the quiet account means nothing. Now flip it around. If your brain is bad at reading wealth, and everyone else's brain has the same bug, then anyone who understands this can exploit it. That's exactly what happened. Marketers figured out, decades before any of us did, that you don't have to be rich. You just have to look rich to people whose brains are scanning for the wrong signals. The entire luxury industry is built on this exploit. There's a name for it. Sociologist Thorstein Veblen coined the term over a century ago, conspicuous consumption. He wasn't talking about buying things you need. He was talking about buying things specifically because other people will see you buying them. The product almost doesn't matter. The visibility is the product. A watch that tells time costs $30. A watch that tells everyone around you that you can afford not to care about $30 costs $30,000. You're not buying the mechanism. You're buying the audience's reaction. Here's where it gets interesting, because real wealth and performed wealth split off in opposite directions. Researchers studying self-made millionaires found something almost boring by comparison. Most of them drove ordinary cars. Many drove the same car for over a decade. They weren't being frugal as a personality quirk. They were following a rule, whether they said it out loud or not. Never let a depreciating asset carry a loan. A car loses value the moment you drive it off the lot. Financing that loss means paying interest on top of money you're already losing. It's a double penalty, and the wealthy avoid double penalties instinctively, the same way you'd avoid touching a hot stove twice. This is the gap between what's called old money and new money, and it's not really about how long a family has had cash. It's about whether wealth is something you're trying to prove or something you've stopped needing to prove. New money tends to be loud because the wealth is recent and the insecurity is fresh. There's an unconscious need to confirm to yourself and everyone watching that the money is real. Old money, or anyone who has sat with wealth long enough to relax into it, tends to go quiet. The 40-year-old car gets fixed instead of replaced. The house doesn't get bigger. The watch doesn't change. Not because the person can't afford more, but because the performance stopped feeling necessary somewhere along the way. So what do the genuinely wealthy actually spend money on, if not the visible stuff? This is the part almost nobody talks about, because it doesn't photograph well. They spend on time. A wealthy person will pay someone else to mow the lawn, manage the inbox, fly commercial through a connection, instead of driving 4 hours, not because the activity is hard, but because every hour bought back is an hour that can be pointed at something that compounds. They spend on optionality. A 6-month emergency fund doesn't look like anything. It's not a status symbol, it's a force field. It means a bad month at work doesn't turn into a financial crisis, which means decisions get made from a position of calm instead of panic, which, it turns out, leads to consistently better decisions over time. And they spend on boredom. Index funds, long-term real estate, decades-long ownership stakes in ordinary businesses. None of it makes for an interesting Instagram story. All of it quietly compounds while everyone else is refinancing a car they shouldn't have bought in the first place. There's one more category that almost never gets mentioned, and it might be the strangest of all. They spend on being left alone. Privacy itself becomes a purchase, a property with no neighbors close enough to compare driveways with, a financial advisor instead of a public portfolio to brag about. The freedom to make a financial decision without an audience weighing in is, to someone who has actually built wealth, worth more than almost anything that could be displayed instead. The irony is hard to miss. The people with the least to prove are the ones who go furthest out of their way to make sure nobody's watching. There's a psychological trap hiding inside all of this, and it's worth naming directly because it's the trap that keeps otherwise smart people from ever closing the gap. Researcher Paul Piff at UC Irvine ran a series of experiments on how money changes behavior, and one finding stands out. As people accumulate more resources, their sense of personal control increases, and so does their sense of entitlement to that control. That's not automatically a bad thing, but it cuts the other way too. When people without resources try to act like they already have them, the brain still produces that same sense of entitlement to comfort, the same justification for the splurge, the relaxed shoulders that should only come from an actual financial cushion. The car loan doesn't just cost money. It manufactures a feeling of security that hasn't been earned yet, and that borrowed feeling is exactly what keeps the spending going. Here's the twist most people never connect. The visible spending and the invisible spending aren't separate categories. They're competing for the exact same dollar. Every payment that goes toward looking rich is a payment that can't go toward becoming rich. It's not that buying nice things is wrong. It's that most people are unconsciously trading their actual future net worth for a temporary signal that, ironically, the people whose opinion they're chasing have usually trained themselves to ignore. The man in the faded t-shirt at the airport wasn't fooled by anyone's car. He stopped being fooled decades ago, which is partly how he ended up able to afford one without needing to prove it. This connects to something Nobel-winning psychologists Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky identified called loss aversion. People feel the pain of losing money roughly twice as intensely as they feel the pleasure of gaining the same amount. You'd think this would make people more cautious with debt. It often does the opposite, because the loss of status, the loss of looking successful in front of coworkers or family, registers in the brain as a real loss, just as sharply as a loss of cash. So people will take on actual financial risk to avoid a social one. They'll finance the car to avoid the discomfort of seeming like they couldn't. There's a real example of this gap that became famous almost by accident. In the 1990s, a researcher named Thomas Stanley spent years interviewing actual millionaires for a study that eventually became a best-selling book. He expected to find country clubs and imported cars. Instead, he found electricians, scrap metal dealers, and small business owners living in modest homes in unremarkable neighborhoods, buying used cars in cash, and rarely if ever wearing a name brand anyone would recognize. Meanwhile, the neighborhoods people associate with wealth, the ones with the gated entrances and the matching luxury SUVs in every driveway, turned out to be full of high earners with almost no net worth at all. High income, high expenses, nothing left over. They had the income of a wealthy person, and the balance sheet of someone living paycheck to paycheck, just a much more expensive paycheck. Stanley had stumbled onto the same gap the Princeton study would later measure directly. The visible markers of wealth and the actual presence of wealth aren't just unrelated, they're often inversely related, because the dollars spent signaling the first one are dollars that can never become the second one. It's stranger when you look at what happens inside a single household over time. Financial counselors who work with lottery winners and people who inherit sudden wealth report the same pattern. Almost word for word, no matter who they're talking to. The new money goes toward the visible things first. The bigger house, the new cars, plural, the vacations posted in real time. And within a handful of years, a significant share of that sudden wealth is gone. Not because the person was reckless by nature, but because their brain was still calibrated to a smaller income, while their spending had already adjusted to the appearance of the bigger one. The lifestyle expanded immediately. The financial wisdom needed to support it took years that the money didn't wait around for. Think about your own spending the next time you're standing in front of a price tag. Ask which version of yourself the purchase is actually for. The version other people will glance at for 2 seconds in a parking lot, or the version 20 years from now who either has options or doesn't. Most expensive things are bought for an audience that statistically isn't paying nearly as much attention as you think, and definitely isn't keeping score the way you imagine. The only ledger that's actually being kept is your own. So next time you walk past someone who doesn't look like much, you might want to look twice after all. Not because every plain t-shirt hides a fortune. Most of the time, plain just means plain. But because the instinct to judge wealth by what's loud, the same instinct that's been wired into your brain since long before credit cards existed, is exactly the instinct the truly wealthy have learned to stop listening to. They didn't get rich by buying what looked rich, they got rich by quietly refusing to.